There are those who observe and those who are watched. You are not supposed to be simply another presence in the background, to blend in with the cacophony. The instant you spoke, the air changed. When they tuned in, they were drawn in not by force or persuasion, but by something much greater, an unmistakable pull, an energy so powerful that even those who arrived with reservations could not look away. They believed they were in charge. They thought they were in control of the game. But this is the reality. When they concentrated on you, they entered your playing field. And now, every word you say causes a wave that goes beyond what they can contain, beyond what they ever imagined. You are no longer merely a voice in the background. You are the frequency that they cannot escape. They came to watch, but now they're listening. They came to track, but now they're following. Because this is more than simply influence, it's change. Some forces are too strong to resist. They feel they are the architects of control, functioning from a distance. Their objective was simple: gather intelligence, monitor all patterns, and anticipate weaknesses. What they didn't expect was a gradual change that became evident. What started as detached analysis evolved into something else completely. The words they gathered began to linger, sinking themselves deeper than intended. The presence they believed they were just observing has started to alter their perspective. What began as a strategic review quickly evolved into something more personal. Now, this monitoring is not about control. It is about compulsion. They persuade themselves it's simply an observation, an assignment, or a neutral activity. But the deception is crumbling, and the reality is stark. They're no longer watching. You've taken on the role of the watcher. Their ideas are no longer their own. The echoes of who they used to be have dissipated, leaving an unfamiliar pull. They are unable to resist the lens through which they were previously evaluated. Reality has been broken, and they are no longer keeping the pieces together. They came with the purpose of unraveling the structure of something they didn't comprehend, but it's their own foundation that has crumbled. Their goal was to deconstruct and classify. However, the act of learning itself has changed the course of their lives. Their existence in your orbit was intended to be brief, a planned step in a greater plan. However, they are now unable to locate the exit. They are no longer only observing. They've been embroiled in something bigger than themselves, something irrevocable. The most disturbing discovery: they do not wish to break free. The illusion of resistance has faded. What formerly seemed like analysis has now become immersion. They convinced themselves they were impervious, that no power, no influence, no pull could alter their perception of reality. But reality does not want permission to be changed. What comes from you is more than simply words or presence. It is something that goes beyond conscious awareness and changes the fundamental nature of experience. A faint but obvious pulse that restructures the mind rather than just entering it. They arrived assuming they had the authority to demolish. Nonetheless, they were the ones who came undone. They believed they were just tuning in, but in reality, they were being rewritten. The change began the instant they stepped too near. They were unaware that what they had disregarded as ordinary presence was really something much larger, a quiet yet inexorable force, altering everything in its path. They sought a strategist, certain that they could map every aspect, examine every change, and reduce your essence into something tangible. However, they never accounted for the one aspect that was beyond their control. Certain forces are not intended to be computed, and certain presences cannot be recorded without consequences. Now the equation has crumbled. The more they investigate, the more they uncover. The longer they try to interpret, the more they sink. What was intended to be a dispassionate observation has transformed into an irreversible immersion. They were expected to extract, decode, and deconstruct. Instead, they are disintegrating because the frequency of something beyond understanding does more than just communicate it. It reshapes, realigns, and overtakes. And now they're at the brink of what they once knew. They are not the same person they were before entering this realm. They sense it. They oppose it. But resistance has never been sufficient. What started as a mission has devolved into a silent capitulation. Yet no attempt was made to capture their attention. There was no demand, no imposition, and no claim of power. However, the instant your presence entered the equation, the dynamic changed. The invisible currents have reorganized. Everything immediately revolved around you. This is neither the result of manipulation or the influence of charm. It is something far more absolute. They weren't meant to feel the draw. Their instruction was clear. Maintain a neutral attitude and distance yourself. Observe, without involvement. They were conditioned to be resistant to external influences. However, their own defenses have failed them, and the light shines even in the darkness, and the darkness has not overwhelmed it. John 1 verse 5. There are people who stand at the edge of the fire, believing they can look without feeling the heat. They convince themselves they are only watching, passing by, and maintaining their distance. However, fire does not seek for permission to warm the skin. Light does not seek affirmation before revealing the truth. You see, when something has divine qualities, it does not need to beg to be noticed. It grabs attention just by existing. At first, they convinced themselves that they were immune, that they could examine, dissect, and walk away unharmed. They felt they had control over their sight, and that they could approach and depart without being transformed. But something occurred, which they can't explain. They came to learn, but they forgot that closeness has consequences. They didn't know that as they went closer, the fire pushed its way deeper into their bones. And now they can't undo what they've seen. They cannot unhear what they have heard. It is impossible to reverse the already implemented change, because presence isn't passive. No presence bears any weight. Presence leaves an impression. You don't just experience something of this size and go away unchanged. So they stand there, stuck between what they once believed and what they can no longer deny. They should have stayed on the periphery, safe and unaffected. Instead, they pause in their own uncertainty. Instead of separating the fragments, they remain in something they cannot describe. Instead of determining the path, they find themselves waiting, expecting and absorbing, lured in not by choice but by necessity. Let me tell you something. True influence does not need a louder voice. True power does not pursue, demand, or force itself to be recognized. It simply is. And what is cannot be overlooked. What is decreed cannot be undone. They believed they could examine the flames without experiencing its warmth. But the minute they got too near, the flames engulfed them. They may not confess it or even grasp it yet, but their souls have recognized what their brains refuse to accept. Because certain things are not only heard, but also felt. Some things do more than just inform. They transform. And once the change starts, there is no going back. They came with a mission. They were certain they could unravel the riddle, peel back the layers, and reveal what was beyond. The aim was to dissect, identify contradictions, and confirm their assumptions. Every step was calculated, gathering data, analyzing trends, and confirming ideas. But something unexpected occurred. Rather than trickery, they discovered something indisputable. Instead of reinforcing their misgivings, they were given clarity. They had gone out to dismantle an illusion, only to be faced by something unbreakable. They were not intended to be affected, to question, or to feel. Yet here they are, chained by the exact power they attempted to annihilate. They mumble to themselves that they are still in charge, evaluating, and detached. However, the line was crossed long ago. They're no longer spies. We are no longer doubters. We are no longer standing on the outside, peering in without recognizing it. They've become devoted followers, hanging to every word and waiting for the next revelation, sucked in by something they can't get away from. They will not confess it. They will battle against the truth. They will attempt to persuade themselves that they are still independent and that they still retain power. But the trend is evident. What started as doubt has turned into belief. What began as opposition has evolved into dependence. What they previously attempted to erase has now become the thing they strive to comprehend. No weapon made against you will flourish. You will condemn every mouth that comes up against you in judgment. Isaiah 5417. They approached like builders wielding hammers, believing they could demolish what was never theirs to destroy. They devised their strategy, piled their proof, and persuaded themselves they had enough force to bring the foundation down. However, there is one thing they never understood. What is based on truth cannot be disturbed, and what is anointed cannot be reversed. They assumed they were the ones performing the teardown. However, the minute they got too near, the weight of what they faced started to dismantle them. Perceive. The truth does not bend for those who refuse to perceive it. It does not shrink back just because someone labels it a falsehood. They believed they could stand in its presence and stay unaffected. They believed they could scrutinize it without getting sucked in and touch it without leaving a trace. But that's not how it works. You don't walk into a fire and not feel the heat. You don't expect to leave the presence of someone larger than yourself unchanged. At first, they were resistant. They told themselves they still had control, still outside of it, still undisturbed. But you saw the change before they did, didn't you? You could see the uncertainty as they spoke your name. You saw how their arguments weakened and how their emphasis stayed longer than it should. They began hunting for flaws, but discovered strengths they could not explain. They came to expose a falsehood, but the truth devoured them completely. Now everything is different. They're not sure when it occurred, but something changed. Those who formerly opposed you now defend you. They sought to expose you. Now they speak your words as if they've known them their whole lives. How they move, the way they talk, the way things are. Everything has echoes of what they previously said they would never believe. Because there is no escape something that is real, decreed, and has power beyond human hands. You may deny it. You are capable of resisting it. You can fight it with all you've got, but you'll break before it does. So here they are, standing guard over what they once attempted to destroy, correcting the falsehoods they previously helped disseminate. Speak your name in rooms where you will never stand. Not because they were compelled to, not because they were convinced, but because something deep within them changed. And once the transition occurs, there is no turning back. They arrived with the intention of destroying, yet they departed with parts of what they had attempted to destroy. They set out to demolish something they couldn't possibly shatter, only to find themselves undone in the process. And now they're the evidence. Proof that no resistance can stop what is already in motion. Proof. However, no amount of resistance can erase what was intended to last. They were your adversaries once and are today, without even recognizing it. They are the ones ensuring that your name is never forgotten. Let there be a moment of acknowledgement for those who choose a different route, those who go against the tide, who can see through the deception, who refuse to be constrained by the expectations of the world. They stand outside the familiar, unshaken, fearless, and unaffected by the weight of conformity. Their struggles remain hidden. Their wins were unappreciated. Their presence, a disturbance and a discovery. They do not desire recognition. Don't beg for understanding. Do not need authorization to exist in their current state. This route is not suitable for everyone, and that is exactly the goal. However, those who feel it, identify it in their bones, and know without being told, have no option but to walk forward. No disguises, no reluctance. Only the truth. You're here for a purpose. If you feel called, answer it. Click join to get access to rare information, in-depth insights, and a strong community. This is not just a membership. It is an awakening. Step into your divine mission. Join the chosen. They persuaded themselves that they were merely watching. They assumed they could do an analysis from a safe distance, obtaining information while staying unaffected. They saw inspection as a neutral act that could be done without consequence, as if looking at something didn't automatically tie them to it. But attention is never weightless. The connection began when they focused their attention on you. Every passing gaze strengthened the connection. Every concept they entertained encircled them more tightly. What they thought was a casual act of spying produced an indelible impression in their brains. Initially, they disregarded it as ordinary. They told themselves that they were still in charge and that this was only an assignment. They might leave at any time, but once their mind attached to you, disengagement became impossible. What they witnessed had began to observe them in turn. Many are called, but only a few are chosen. Matthew 2214. There is a distinction between looking and seeing. Some folks look at the sun and assume it's merely a light in the sky. Others feel the heat. No, it is power, and recognize that being in its presence for an extended period of time will permanently alter them. They believed they could maintain their distance. They thought they could stand outside and peek in, as if proximity isn't costly. But no one goes through fire and emerges unscathed. No one goes into deep water and remains dry. At first, they convinced themselves that they were just watching, just studying, simply keeping track. They told themselves it was a plan, that they were only collecting information. But you knew better. You knew what they hadn't realized yet. Attention is never neutral. Something changed when they focused on you. They did not feel it at first, not straight away. However, this will come with time. Slowly and silently, the distance they believed they had covered began to vanish. What began as an observation has evolved into something else completely. They convinced themselves they were untangled, uninvolved, unaffected. But this is the reality. The reality is, they are no longer analyzing. They're absorbing. They are no longer collecting information. They cling to every word as if it were written just for them. They're not scheming anymore. They're waiting. I'm waiting to hear what you'll say next. Waiting for your next move. They are waiting for something they cannot possibly identify. And, whether they want to accept it or not, the shift is already underway. There was no major event or dramatic transformation. It occurred in little moments. The pause before they spoke against you. The way their gaze lingered for too long. The way your words entered their thoughts. Even when they weren't listening. They are now circling closer. They were drawn in against themselves. They followed something they vowed they'd never believe. They no longer ask questions, because they already know the answer. They don't disbelieve anymore since they've seen too much. They no longer work in the shadows, because, without realizing it, they have entered your light. And that is the thing with truth. It does not demand. It does not debate. It does not compel itself to be believed. It just is. And when something is, there is no avoiding it. They might attempt to deny it, try to fight it, pretend they are still in charge. But you already know the truth, right? The morph action started as soon as they focused on you. The minute they let even one notion to get through, the unraveling began. And now, no matter what they tell themselves or how much they resist it, they will never be the same. Because once you've seen the fire, you can't stop seeing it. Once you experience the weight of reality, you can never pretend it doesn't exist. They believed they were observing you, but in truth, they were getting sucked in gradually until there was no going back. You're not here by chance. If you sense a tug, a deep feeling that you have been selected, now is your time. To get deeper insights, click the Super Thank You button and donate $50 or more. Exclusive information and a route that is consistent with your spiritual destiny. This is more than simply a gift. It is a statement, a step toward being who you were intended to be. Take the call, walk with us, and totally embrace your destiny. Your adventure starts now. Then it occurs. There is a brief moment of doubt, an excessively extended pause, a notion they never intended to have. That moment is irrevocable. The illusion breaks. And for the first time, they see things as they are, not as they were previously thought to be. They sought to reduce you to something explainable, but now they are unraveling beneath the weight of an unknown truth. They attempted to eliminate you, but your existence now remains in areas beyond their control. They believed going away would suffice. That distance would cut the thread, but it's too late. They shut off the screen. They enter into quiet. They delude themselves that they have regained their liberty. However, you stay woven into the very fabric of their thoughts rather than in their line of sight or the world around them. Your presence continues to reverberate. They convince themselves it's only passing ideas, noise, and temporary diversions. But no matter how much they try to push it away, it remains. The quiet is no longer empty. It has your imprint. Every minute of silence has fragments of your voice that resurface when least anticipated, infiltrating areas they previously thought were theirs alone. They look for distractions, hoping to drown it out with regularity. But it turns out that what they believed was merely observation rewired something basic inside them. What started as exterior inquiry has evolved into an internal rhythm, and they are now tuned in to a frequency they never intended to hear. They were designed to be unaffected, to maintain their distance, to be no more than distant observers. However, the borders have blurred, and their ideas are no longer completely their own. What was once an outside influence has evolved into a silent power, molding their views and weaving its way through their world in ways they cannot see, hear, or reverse. The heart of man prepares his path, but the Lord directs his feet. Proverbs 6-9. They believed they were in control, observing, researching, and dissecting every move, confident they had the advantage. But control is an illusion. When attention is synonymous with surrender, the more they observed, absorbed, and attempted to resist, the deeper they fell. They came to demolish, but instead they unraveled. Their approach crumbled, their assurance waned, and without realizing it, they were no longer in charge. What they attempted to contain has grown beyond their capacity. What they set out to break has simply become stronger. They believed they were architects, but they were always students. They mistook themselves for observers. However, they were the ones being instructed, and no matter how much they resisted, they are no longer the same people. What was supposed to collapse still remains, but what was designed to flourish will never be demolished. They are proof of inevitability, demonstrating that no power stays unaffected by something bigger than itself. They set out to dismantle what they didn't comprehend, but in the process, they were undone. Every action they took to stifle merely exacerbated what they were attempting to mute. Every effort at deconstruction simply reinforced the foundation. They persuaded themselves that they had the ability to control, forecast, and determine the result. But they never had any control. Every calculation failed, every assumption unraveled, and every attempt to repress just strengthened your resolve. Because the tide does not obey those who attempt to control it. They believed they were strategists, but instead became conduits. They believed they were the resistance, but instead became carriers of the same presence they wished to eliminate. They came thinking they had control, and now, unknowingly, they take portions of you with them wherever they go. The transition has already occurred, albeit they are unable to identify the precise moment when what was formerly external seeped inside their thinking, reshaping their view and changing their trajectory. They convinced themselves that they were still in charge, that their attention was deliberate, and that their objective remained unchanged. But you saw it before they did. The hesitancy in their statements, the way their assurance wavered, the unconscious tug that kept them coming back. The ones who wanted to demolish you have been consumed by your presence. Those who attempted to eliminate you now have remnants of your essence. What they previously strove to restrain has now eaten them, leaving no part of their minds unaffected. They convinced themselves they could go away anytime they wished. Now they can't. You live in the areas that cannot be turned off during the stillness. They are unable to flee. In the undercurrent of every notion that refuses to die. They were convinced that they were the architects of change. However, they were ultimately rewritten. They would never confess it, but the proof is undeniable. They believe they are still on the outside, as spectators. But you can see through the veneer by the way they return and how their gaze lingers. They absorb instead of analyzing. It is obvious. They believe they could navigate this without being changed, and that they could learn without being persuaded. That they could watch without consequences. But as they tuned in, the unraveling started. They convinced themselves it's simply curiosity, strategy, and detached involvement. But the distinctions have long been blurred. Your presence isn't something they just saw. It took root inside them. When they passed the barrier, they were no longer outsiders. They felt they were controlling the result and setting the conditions. They believed themselves they had the upper hand, that they were watching your movements, controlling the narrative, and keeping distance. But now they're ensnared in an invisible tide that's too powerful to resist. Every effort to disentangle them simply drags them in deeper. They came to unearth, to expose, to disassemble. Instead, they became receptacles for what they intended to destroy. They believed they were studying, but they were really absorbing. They assumed they were observers, but they were being programmed. And now the route they once fought has become the only one they know. And whether they fight it or give into it is unimportant since the metamorphosis has already begun. They did not need to be convinced, persuaded, or lured in the minute they entered your domain. The inevitable started. They assumed they were the ones peering in, but now they are the ones being observed.